Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the morning show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, December 26th, 2019. Getting towards the end of 2019. We are back on the air live today through the magic of, some sort of magic at Netroots Radio. Justice Putnam, of course, off for the week, but I don't know whether he has set up shows for himself, but he has set things out nicely for us and left things on auto connect so that while he is off and visiting with family, and we wish him well, he has left the door open for us to do a couple of live shows to end out the week. And that's good news because we've been off for 2 days, and I know that's been tough. Maybe you've been off for 2 days. Maybe you've been enjoying it. Maybe it was better. Goodbye, everybody. That's it. That's it for the show. We're going to let you enjoy the rest of the holiday season on your own. I guess we should have thought about that. Everyone could use a couple of days off. We didn't get any days off, 24-hour periods off from Donald Trump and his anger tweeting. I thought they would mostly, and they did, they mostly kept him in check. And I think somebody actually convinced him that during the day, at least on Christmas, that he should be refraining from his usual anger tweeting. And they probably kept him busy. Look, we'll keep you busy. There'll be things to do. You won't miss it so much. You'll play golf. We'll have some parties. Some rich people will be around. Some unknown Chinese people will be around. Some pardoned war criminals will be around. You can have a great time. And Melania will be there. So what do you need the Twitter machine for? And of course, he was driven back to it by the end of the day, around, it looked like it was about 9 o'clock last night. He was back to yelling and screaming about Nancy Pelosi. He's back at it this morning. I knew when I when I queued up the post for this morning last night, I knew I'd be wrong by morning time, and I anticipated it, and so it is. That happens to be the case. He's a fairly predictable guy, which is what makes him so terrible as everything, since he's so, not only is he's just terrible as a human being, he's also predictably terrible, and it gets tiresome after a while. Anyway, I guess we probably don't really need to catch up on what he's been doing. He's mostly ranting and raving. There's more interesting things to catch up on. Greg Dworkin has put a number of them together for today. He'll be joining us shortly and run through them. Mostly a quiet break, I thought, relatively speaking. And so, it didn't bother me much to be away. Not as much as it usually does. The only thing that really bothered me about being away was the number of stories that we have still locked up, captive, in pocket that I think you would probably find interesting. And it would be, these are great opportunities to read those stories, to do pre-recorded shows. On the other side of the coin, of course, is that the holiday season is a busy one. And most of you are running around frantically trying to get things all lined up so that you can relax for the 2 days. And no different here. And it's awfully difficult to find the time to actually record the damn things. And, of course, the kids are home and they're making noise. And that makes it difficult. And I don't want to ruin their vacation by telling them, shut up, kids! And, that doesn't work out very well. And it doesn't add to the holiday spirit. So we'll get to these things as we get to them. There will be a couple of days off coming up as well. Not several in a row, I don't think, but occasional breaks where we'll have to take a turn away from the microphone to get some other tasks done, not holiday spirit tasks, but important things nonetheless. So, lots to catch up on, including, here's an interesting one that is both political and holiday related. Oh, in fact, how about this? Instead, exactly what I was thinking of. We'll just turn things over to Greg and do the roundup. That's about as good a way as starting as any. I have some interesting things to share with you. You'll have to wait. We're going to do some other interesting things. I've had a preview. I have the luxury of having a preview in my Skype conversations here about what's coming up. So I'm excited to see it. Although I will say, Greg, first of all, good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
How's your holiday, I don't know, was it break? Holiday period been?
It's okay. It's good.
Okay.
It's going on still. There's still
yes.
family stuff to do today.
Right, of course.
And, there's family stuff to do over the weekend when we can actually get together. So we're seeing segments here, segments there, and then finally on the weekend everybody can get together.
Everyone gets their turn eventually.
But you're right. It was a relatively quiet Christmas.
Yeah.
And given that the news cycles generally happen every 3 hours these days, it was a welcome break.
Yeah, it was kind of nice. I am now getting a headache looking at these charts that you've sent me, though. I'm worried that these might give people seizures.
Flashing lights come next,
Oh, yeah, that's the next one. These the charts that you're using or sending along here that have, what would you call that blurriness?
That's a margin of error.
Oh, right. Well,
or
it's built into the
if they scare you, they're the margin of terror, as Ariel Edwards Levy likes to call it.
Margin of call my optometrist. Something's wrong.
Something like that. Can you see this graph and what does it mean to you? It's a Rorschach, actually.
Yeah.
If you see things that aren't there, alligator mouths and stuff like that, then start making butterflies using the lamp and see what the shadows appear, and we'll call somebody and get you help.
These are the
so
daily
right now,
polls.
what I was doing is I was sending you various and sundry impeachment charts. This one first one was from Microsoft Network, and it has a daily presidential tracker overall.
This one's okay. Yes.
Right. Remember, this is the one that shows that even though approve, disapprove, Trump numbers aren't changing all that much. Disapprove is 51 and approve is 44. And nonetheless, that same poll shows impeachment moving and staying at 55% should support the Senate voting to remove President Trump from office, and opposition has fallen to 40%. And that blurry thing, for example, that you're looking at is the margin of error. So the margin of error on that 40% is it could be as high as 43, could be as low as 37. That's opposing impeachment. So that's a pretty low number to oppose.
Yeah.
And it shows that you can, on the one hand, have a different idea about what should happen to Trump versus his job numbers, his job approval numbers. And on the other hand, you will recall from the last segment of the show we did on Monday that there can be a difference in wording that changes everything. For example, does everybody in the world understand exactly what impeachment is? Well, maybe not.
Yes.
Maybe to some people, impeachment means you get frog marked with a orange jumpsuit and you get thrown in jail. But if you ask the question and leave the I word out and just say support or oppose Senate voting to remove President Trump from office, perhaps it brings clarity to the people who aren't sure what impeachment was in the first place.
Yes.
Who knows? So for whatever reason, there's that tracking poll. The civics poll asks, would you support or oppose impeaching Donald Trump? Uses the I word.
Oh.
That gets 51 support, 46% opposed. That really hasn't changed all that much ever since Nancy Pelosi announced the impeachment. So again, the idea that there's a backlash, not seeing it, doesn't exist. I'll tell you what there's a backlash for.
Okay.
A backlash is what happens when right-wing commentators decide that they're really clever and decide that National Socialism, otherwise known as the Nazi Party, just shows that socialists are all Nazis. That's the thing.
Sure.
I mean, everybody before Christmas, Dinesh D'Souza and a bunch of people you never heard of, and I'm not even going to tell you who they are because maybe it's good that you never heard of them, continue to post weird things. Read the Nazi 25-point program, says Dinesh D'Souza. State control of banks, education, churches, of industry, and then honestly answer, does this sound right-wing or left-wing? And, of course, that sparked interest in the Auschwitz Museum. When you're getting dunked on by Auschwitz Museum, you've done something terribly wrong. So they write back at D'Souza and saying, actually, the program of the Nazi Party doesn't even mention banks or control of churches. So, in other words, you're full of crap. And I just thought you should mention that. And people warn the Auschwitz Memorial, which is the feed. Careful, you guys. Arguing with Dinesh is like playing chess with a pigeon. Just knocks over the pieces, poops everywhere, and then struts around like a one. So, you got to be careful about stuff like that. But, it's worth mentioning at least once that there's this nonsense out there. There's a nonsense machine, and that nonsense machine continues to crank out stuff. And the stuff they crank out isn't always terribly deep, but it's just garbage. And that's why when you see words like impeach, they can't own every word. They can't print garbage about every concept here. So that's why I like that they're talking about the Senate in a different way. And, of course, Lisa Murkowski making centrist noises, saying she's very troubled by Mitch McConnell's declaration that we're not supposed to be nonpartisan. It troubles her like things trouble Susan Collins. But Murkowski's got a pretty decent voting record about voting against Republicans when it's in her interest, or at least in her Alaskan constituents' interest, which is why she didn't support Brett Kavanaugh. Got a lot of pressure from home not to do that. And what that tells us, really, it's like criminology. You got to read the tea leaves a little bit here. But McConnell does not have all the votes locked up, or she never would have said that publicly. So that doesn't mean that McConnell's lost and Pelosi's won or anything like that. But the decision in the Senate as to whether or not to have witnesses is, shall we say, still in flux.
Yes. Doesn't change the removal calculus, but
not at all. But the question really isn't about
only
removal.
indirectly.
It's about what is the Senate trial going to show us about what's going on.
Right.
And it'll be, we know it'll be incredibly well watched. It's a historic event. So I don't think they can go with this is really boring. Nobody's going to look. Everybody's going to look. It's going to dominate everything. So how it's done matters in terms of 2020. And, that's the jockeying that's going on here.
All right. Well, that's as jockeying goes. It's pretty good. I'll take it. She's playing a bit of a game, but occasionally she actually comes through. Collins never comes through. She plays the same.
Right, exactly. And I've been telling people, Murkowski isn't Collins. If Collins said that, it's like, okay, more noise before she votes the way Republicans want. Murkowski, you can't say that because you don't know.
Yes. Okay. So that's, I'd rather have that up in the air. It's better than not having any comment from them. I'll say that. And it keeps our interest, and it keeps the story in the headlines. It could have faded away even just over the little holiday break, but thankfully, people like her fanning those flames for different reasons, and Trump, of course, only making the case stronger every time he opens his mouth for removing him.
Right. So one of the stories that hasn't faded away is that Christianity Today article, which calls for Trump's removal, still is resonating.
Yes.
So there's a separate entity called Christian Post, and they had a pro and con support of Trump, support of Christianity Today editorial op-ed sort of stuff, which sparked discussion over at Christian Post. And the next thing we know, the decision by Christianity Today to publish an editorial describing President Trump as immoral and calling for his removal drew immediate rebuke from the president. At the same time, the longtime centrist right evangelical magazine saw Russia cancel subscriptions and an even greater wave of new subscribers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right.
Right. And then the next thing, journalist Nap Nasworth, who's worked with the Christian Post website since 2011, said he quit his job Monday because the website was planning to publish a pro-Trump editorial that would slam Christianity Today. Nasworth, who sits on the editorial board as politics editor, said the website had sought to represent both sides and publish both pro- and anti-Trump stories. I never got the gist. They were gung-ho Trumpian types. Everything's escalated with the Christianity Today editorial. Nasworth, who's been critical of Trump and suggested leaders who supported him betrayed their moral authority, says he doesn't know what he'll do next. I said, if you post this, you're saying you're now in Team Trump. He said he was told that's what the news outlet wanted to be.
Oh.
I'm just shocked that they would go this path, he said, even though he felt forced to make the decision to quit, the parting was mutual. And Richard Land, a Christian Post executive editor, who was one of the co-authors of the editorial published Tuesday, didn't return requests for comment. So you have people quitting, losing their job. I mean, stuff is still resonating here. That's the surface things that we see. We don't know what's below the surface. Again, as multiple commentators have pointed out, it's not like all of a sudden the evangelical community is going to turn on Trump. But what it's doing is empowering people like Nasworth who do have dissenting voices. It's encouraging them to speak out for various and sundry reasons, not good ones sometimes, like they fired him.
Yes.
But they're willing to speak out, and they were not willing to speak out before. So that can only help.
Yes. We'll take it for what it's worth. Sure.
Right. But the idea that, okay, they're going to just post this and then that's the end of it. It's not the end of it.
That's good news.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm glad that they have they've done their part in keeping that in the news.
Right.
I'm
Now,
pleased.
it's going to be a relatively short segment from me today because I've got some family stuff to do, so I'll be off at 9:30.
I see.
But a couple of very fascinating and worthwhile discussions by an excellent journalist, Adam Serwer, in The Atlantic.
Yes.
The first one I'll just mention in passing so that people are aware it exists. It's called The Fight Over the 1619 Project is not about the facts. There's a dispute between a small group of scholars and the authors of the New York Times Magazine's issue on slavery, representing a fundamental disagreement over the trajectory of American society.
I see.
The clash between the Times authors and the historian critics represent a fundamental disagreement over was America founded on a slavocracy and our current racial inequities natural outgrowth, or was America conceived in liberty, nation haltingly redeeming itself through its founding principles? Not simple questions to answer because the nation's pro-slavery and anti-slavery tendencies are so closely intertwined.
Well, I had a war.
But as Sarah puts it, Americans need to believe that, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of history bends toward justice, and they're rarely kind to those who question whether it does.
Okay.
The 1619 Project suggests a darker vision of the nation in which Americans have made less progress than they think, and in which black people continue to struggle indefinitely for rights they may never fully realize. Inherent in the vision is a kind of pessimism not about black struggle, but about the sincerity and viability of white anti-racism. It's a harsh verdict, and one of the reasons the 1619 Project has provoked pointed criticism alongside praise. And so there's a group of historians who are saying it didn't stay true to the fundamental truths about how we got formed as a country. And that letter is going to be published this Sunday in the New York Times Magazine, although we do have a copy of it. And a lot of other historians are sort of weighing in, saying things like, without getting into another discussion altogether, let's cite my own work about Reconstruction and things I know about, says Bruce Baker. Mm-hmm. It would be nice if eminent historians with easy access to huge audiences would keep up with the scholarship. Get off my lawn is not a good look for our profession. So already the letter is coming into some criticism, and I just thought I'd bring it to your attention because it's worthwhile paying attention to that.
Yes.
Yesterday's Christmas Pundit Roundup has the link to that article and the link to the letter. Again, I thought it was interesting. But that's not even the best article that Adam Serwer wrote this week.
Oh, well, good for him.
Actually, this one wasn't this week. It was November 20th, 2017. But he went back to it because it's just a fascinating article. It's called The Nationalist Illusion. And given the past 2 years, it's well worth revisiting. Trump supporters back the time-honored American political tradition disavowing racism while promising to enact a broad agenda of discrimination.
Well, they're two different things.
And what he does is he links back to David Duke. And this is just so worth remembering and not forgetting about. 1990 and David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, astonished political observers when he came within striking distance of defeating incumbent Democratic U.S. Senator J. Bennett Johnston, earning 43% of the vote. If Johnson's Republican rival hadn't dropped out of the race and endorsed him, the outcome might have been different. Was it anxiety, economic anxiety? The Washington Post reported that the state had, quote, a large working class that suffered through a long recession, end quote. Was it a blow against the state's hated political establishment? An editorial from UPI, remember the old United Press International?
Yes.
Louisianans showed the nation by voting for Duke that they were mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. In reference to Howard Beale and the movie Network. Was it anti-Washington rage? A Loyola University pollster argued these are the voters who liked Duke, those who hated J. Bennett Johnston, those who just wanted to send a message to Washington. Sound familiar, huh?
Yes.
What message would these voters have been trying to send by putting a Klansman into office? Well, Susan Howell, then the director of the Survey Research Center at University of New Orleans, told the LA Times there's a message bigger than Louisiana here. There's a tremendous anger and frustration among working-class whites, particularly where there's an economic downturn. These people felt left out. They feel government is not responsive to them.
Yes.
All familiar sounding. But what Serwer points out, Duke's strong showing wasn't powered merely by poor or working-class whites, and the poorest demographic in the state, black voters, backed Johnston. just like the poorest demographic in the country, backed Hillary Clinton. Duke, quote, clobbered Johnston in white working-class districts, ran even with him in predominantly white middle-class suburbs, and lost only because black Louisianans, representing a quarter of the electorate, voted against him in overwhelming numbers. Duke picked up nearly 60% of the white vote. Yeah. Faced with Duke's popularity among whites of all income levels, the press framed his strong showing largely as the result of the economic suffering of the white working class.
Yes.
By accepting the economic theory of Duke's success, the media were buying into the candidate's own vision of himself as a savior of the working class. He'd appeal to workers in economic terms. He tore into welfare, foreign aid, affirmative action, outsourcing, attacked political action committees for subverting the interests of the common man, and even told black voters, "I'm not your enemy."
Oh, well, that did it.
Right. Now, many of Duke's voters steadfastly denied the former Klan leader was a racist.
Well, that's what he did, so...
Yep, he did. St. Petersburg Times reported in 1990 that Duke supporters are likely to blame the media for making him look like a racist. The way I understand the Klan, it's not anti-this or anti-that.
Oh, well, that's the way you understand the Klan. Okay.
Right?
I have
Duke's rejoinder to the heads. And again, you have to frame this in a way that resonates now because we're talking about Donald Trump. Duke's rejoinder to the heads, framing him as a racist, resonated with his supporters. Remember, he told them at rallies, when they smear me, they're really smearing you. That's a David Duke quote.
Oh, I'm going to use that.
Yeah, somebody else is going to use it too. Economic explanation carried the day. Duke was a freak creature of the bayou who managed to tap into the frustrations of a struggling sector of Louisiana. Now, Walter Percy, a Louisiana author, gave a prophetic warning to the New York Times. Don't make the mistake of thinking David Duke is a unique phenomenon confined to Louisiana rednecks and yahoos. He's not. He's not just appealing to the old Klan constituency. He's appealing to the white middle class. And don't think he or somebody like him won't appeal to the white middle class of Chicago or Queens.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. A few days after Duke's strong showing, by one of the funniest coverage of the impeachment was a local Queens, I guess, alt weekly or weekly or something like that. You know, Queens man indicted.
Right. I did see that
all
one.
Politics
Finding
is
the
local.
local angle, yeah.
A few days after Duke's strong showing, the Queens-born businessman Donald Trump appeared on CNN's Larry King Live. It's anger. I mean, it's an anger vote. If you look at Louisiana, they're really in deep trouble. Trump later predicted that Duke, if he ran for president, would siphon most of his votes away from George H.W. Bush, in the process revealing his own understanding of the effectiveness of white nationalist appeals to the GOP base.
Mm-hmm.
Whether he's good or bad, David Duke is going to get a lot of the votes. Pat Buchanan is going to take a lot of the votes away from George Bush. So if you have these two guys running, or even one of them, I think George Bush can be in big trouble. Less than a year later, Buchanan embarrassed Bush by drawing 37% of the vote in New Hampshire's Republican primary. In February 2016, Trump was asked by a different CNN host about the former Klan leader's endorsement of his Republican presidential bid. Well, just so you understand, I don't know anything about David Duke.
Yes, right.
Right? Having analyzed him for television, I now know nothing about him.
Right.
I don't know anything about what you're even talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not nothing I know anything about unless it's to my advantage to know, in which case I know it better than anyone.
Right. Now, during the last few weeks of the campaign, Server says, I asked dozens of Trump supporters about their candidates' remarks regarding Muslims and people of color. I wanted to understand how these average Republicans, those who would never read the neo-Nazi website The Daily Stormer or go to a Klan rally at a Confederate statue, had nonetheless embraced someone who demonized religious and ethnic minorities. What I found was that Trump embodied his supporters' most profound beliefs, combining an insistence that discriminatory policies were necessary with vehement denials his policies would discriminate. An outrage that the question would be asked.
Yes.
Right? We're not racist. We're not discriminating. We hate discrimination. That's why it's so important we make sure that blacks can't get welfare.
Mm-hmm.
Or Medicare or Medicaid or any kind of health insurance or anything else because we're not discriminating.
Right. No one can get it except us. And then no one else.
And how dare you even bring it up? You're racist for asking. I mean, that's basically the theme here. Okay? It's not just Trump supporters who are in denial about what they were voting for, but Americans across the political spectrum who, as had been the case with those who backed Duke, searched desperately for any alternative explanation, outsourcing anti-Washington anger, economic anxiety, to the ones staring them in the face. The frequent post-election media expeditions to Trump country, to see whether the fever had broken, or whether Trump's most ardent supporters have changed their minds, are a direct outgrowth of this mistake. Those supporters will not change their minds because this is what they always wanted, a president who embodies the rage they feel towards those they hate and fear, while reassuring them that rage is nothing to be ashamed of. Trump feels no shame. You shouldn't either. That's his message. And so the idea that you're going to go and find these guys in diners and other places and say, well, have you changed your mind yet? Why would I change my mind? When it comes to this, he's me.
That's true. Plus, if I do change my mind.
But yeah, I mean, but everybody has a right to be in the United States, no matter what your color, no matter what your race. But I just think some of us just say racial statements without even thinking about it.
Yes,
right?
That's
but
true.
She also defended Trump's remarks on race and religion explicitly. I think the other party likes to blow it out of proportion and twist his words. But what he says is what he means, and it's what a lot of us are thinking.
Yeah.
And that's true. And that comes to a recent Chuck Todd interview where he says, my God, I can't believe it, but these guys really don't tell the truth. It's just, I'm amazed. I'm amazed that it's been going on for a couple of years and they keep doing it. I'm just astounding. Maybe I'm naive, but I just keep repeating because I just keep repeating it.
Yeah, well, it's his job for the most part.
So that's how the media aids and abets this whole concept.
Well, that's an interesting. What a good pairing. Did you say the second piece from Adam Serwer is older, 2017?
The one I just read from is 2017.
Okay. Well, good eye there, and thanks for putting the two of them together. That's really fantastic.
He's the guy who said cruelty is the point. He's very good.
Apparently so. Well, I think we all need that.
Anyway, I'll talk to you on Monday.
Okay, very good. Thanks. Have a great weekend. Enjoy it. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. And Greg, he's gone. Unfortunately, we only had him for half an hour today, he said so right at the outset. And what a half hour it was. That's a great pairing of articles that he brought us. It's hard to go wrong, really, even picking two Adam Serwer articles more or less at random. You're likely not only to have a pretty good pairing, but they may work together. They may not. I don't know. Both of them are likely to be fantastic writing. He's very insightful. We're glad to have him available to us and making these observations. The third article that Greg mentioned just on his way out the door here was the Rolling Stone piece about Chuck Todd, and I saw a lot of commentary about it over the weekend. Some more thoughtful than others, but it's touted to me by Greg as a great piece in itself. And I did see an awful lot of people talking about it. It follows very nicely, I think, on the segment. Moves slightly away, of course, from Serwer's theme here, but only slightly, I guess, in the sense that I guess any sort of disinformation would spread this way. And you may have seen the Rolling Stone piece. If not, it's not that long. Perhaps we ought to just share it with you now. How disinformation spreads, according to Chuck Todd. And I don't know whether he's probably right, but I think we've known kind of how disinformation spreads even long before he told us, and even before reading the article, but I'm assured it's a good one. I'm a little resentful at the idea that Chuck Todd is the one that's going to tell me how disinformation moves when we've all watched him play a part in that. But okay, this and I've seen the thing critiqued, and it's mostly along those lines. How for Chuck Todd to be lecturing us or even sharing his thoughts, if we want to put it that way, about how disinformation spreads when he's had such a tremendous hand in spreading it is more than a little irritating. But of course, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about Chuck Todd. It doesn't have anything to do with his work on Meet the Press because I never watched that. My mixed feelings come from, on the one hand, knowing that personally he's a fairly, regular person and a decent one at that and hardworking and just loves politics. Although he does, I will say he probably does love politics as a game more than he should. But I knew Chuck Todd when he was, when he was young, when he was just a kid. In fact, when he was an intern, I put that in the bio. The bio write-up that I probably should revisit every once in a while over at Daily Kos for the masthead stories about the little blurbs about the writers. And I don't know whether I've mentioned the story on the radio show at any point, but it's sort of hanging out there. Years and years and years ago, back in Lost in the Mists of Time, I did a short stint at the Hotline, which is not a publication that a lot of you will necessarily have much experience with or have read or even be familiar with. It's sort of an old school kind of a publication, and then it got merged into, bought up by National Journal, and they kept it separate as the Hotline. So really serious political junkies who've been in the game for a while, and I think they may still publish it separately as the Hotline, but it was a different kind of publication back then. I worked there, I guess it was 1992, late 1992 into early 1993. Not a long time. It was not an easy job. Fun. In hindsight, particularly, but good people, and Chuck Todd was one of them. When I worked there, Chuck Todd was working his way and through college, essentially, and I don't even know whether I'm not certain that he finished or not. But anyway, sort of beside the point. He was the intern. And when I say intern, I guess I should specify. I mean, he was in college, and so the work he was doing was in exchange for college credit. So that's how the internship worked out, and I think it was probably unpaid for that reason, and also because the budget of the Hotline was pretty shoestring. But I guess I'll explain everything. And Greg was just mentioning, by the way, he liked the article for its demonstration of Chuck's cluelessness about the spread of disinformation. As the subheader here reads, Chuck Todd has had a front row seat for the spread of disinformation. Here's how he sees it happening and the media's role in it. Peter Wade writing for Rolling Stone. And I think that was most of the commentary I saw. And it was basically, how could you not have seen this sooner? You did have a front row seat to it. How could you have missed it when everyone else in the cheap seats saw it all the time? But like I said, soft spot for Chuck Todd, and I guess I'll explain the background of that soft spot now. So he's the intern at the Hotline. The Hotline at the time is a total insider publication, but it's one of the first sort of, I guess I don't know what you would call it. It was almost like this CNN politics in written form. The job of the Hotline, the mission of the Hotline was, as we've told ourselves then, to cover the coverage. We would gather up, literally, and this was started in the 80s, I think, and then by the early 90s, we were still publishing the same way. We literally would go out and get every newspaper in the country that we could get our hands on, every daily newspaper that was distributed in any sort of sizable circulation. And we would go, it was part of the job, was we, on a rotating basis, the various writers at the Hotline would be assigned the job for, I don't remember if it was 1 week or 2 weeks, of getting up and getting all the damn newspapers. And anyway, without getting too far into this particular role of this job, although this is a fun story too, the idea was we would gather up all the newspapers we could, every newspaper in America, and we would cut out all the political coverage and sort through it and pick out the hot stories of the day, some things that could go on the back burner. We would file the stories away, but we would literally sit there with newspapers and cut them up with scissors and then write the date on the clipping, and if the clipping didn't have the name of the newspaper on it, you'd have to write that on there, and you'd pass them around, and so it's like a dozen of us sitting in this office. We were at that point in Falls Church, Virginia, so we're out in the suburbs in an old house, in the attic of this old house where they published all these things. The hotline was there. They had the Green Wire for environmental news. There was an abortion report for reproductive health news. There was a health newsletter. There was all sorts of different segments, and we were clipping for all of them and handing them over, but we were focused at the hotline on the politics of it. And the idea was that you would get all that stuff, and then you would tell the political professional community by noon they would have a hard copy on their desk, or if they preferred, some of the really leading edge people were downloading the material. That was only a few of them. A hard copy on your desk by noon every day of the hottest political stories and the coverage of them summarized for you in as few characters as possible by the staff of the hotline. And every pundit, every political consultant, everything, everybody who had anything to do with politics in Washington, D.C. by the early 90s was reading the hotline daily. What didn't matter what your party affiliation was. It was coverage of the coverage, and nobody gave it to you better than the hotline. And if you watched the Sunday shows during that period of time, and I guess it may even still be the case if the hotline is still publishing, I've lost track. But if you watch the Sunday shows, every pundit on every show, every politician on every show was basically telling you what they had read in the hotline the week before, during the previous weeks. And I should also mention to you that who does this sort of a job? Well, everyone, or almost every one of the dozen people up there clipping those articles and summarizing that news was certainly under 30. They were all early 20s at the oldest, with the exception of the editors and editor-in-chief, who were a little bit more experienced, but not by that much, quite honestly. And I remember that at one point, Lamar Alexander came to visit. He was a friend of the publishers, and he came to visit him, and he thought he would take a look around. I just want to see where does the hotline come from? And he came up to our attic hideaway, and it was literally in the attic of an old house. You'd have to climb up these creaky stairs, and he was watching us work, and he was astonished that the political life of the nation, I mean, he knew what he used the hotline for, and he knew what, who read the hotline and how they used it and how important it was. Astonished that the political life of the nation turned on the news judgment and writing ability, summarization ability of 20-somethings, which was really quite amazing. Especially if you think about it now, people are so dismissive of the same age group right now. And they were literally, it was like running not quite a puppet show, because we weren't writing the words. It was coming from the newspapers that we were reading. We weren't freelancing and giving our own opinion. We were summarizing the news for everybody else. But they were just sort of amazed at how much of the political punditry agenda got set there by our decision about what, A, what constituted political news, and B, our news judgment in summarizing the whole thing. But it was really quite interesting. Chuck Todd, as I mentioned, was the intern, which is an unfair label for what he did. He wasn't a coffee boy. And in fact, he was there before I got there, and there after I left. And that was the case for much of the staff. A lot of turnover in a staff like that, and I'll tell you why in a second. But he was a constant because he was, of course, doing it for college credit, and he loved it. And by the time I got there, he was the intern, but he had been the intern for 2 years or something like that, and continued while he was in college. And then he moved right into a permanent job there after graduation, and then shortly after to an editorial job there, because by the time he graduated college, he was the most experienced hotliner they had, with the exception of the editor-in-chief. So, it was a hard-earned internship and a hard-earned position at the place. And by the way, he wasn't ideological. There were very clearly right-wing leaning and left-wing leaning people there, and they did their best to try and balance that out so that the coverage would come out okay and we wouldn't be terribly biased one way or the other. But it was very clear who was who, and Chuck was not as vehement, as stridently ideological as some of the people there, but he was pretty clearly on the Democratic side of the coin, it seemed to me. Anyway, so he had been there for a while, and he stayed there for a while, and he was, he like the rest of us, he knew what he was talking about. He understood politics pretty well. And, his new job sort of calls for something completely different, I guess. And I don't know whether it occurs to him. I don't know whether it bothers him. I don't know whether he's changed. I don't know any of those things. But the idea that he had this evil right-wing agenda, at least at the time, I can tell you, just wasn't my assessment of him. I would never have agreed with that assessment. And I guess I try still not to agree with it, but I'm not that close with him or anything like that. Anyway, in case you were wondering about the political turnover there, maybe this is interesting holiday material. People aren't quite back into the regular news swing of things, right? Here's why there was such turnover. So, as I mentioned, we had to get these things onto people's desks by noon. And in the mostly pre-electronic era, a few people, as I mentioned, did download the hotline. But in the mostly pre-electronic era, that meant at the end of the process, we were literally running off Xeroxes of the, 2,000 copies or something that we had to distribute in Washington, D.C. Now, remember, we're doing this from Falls Church. And what would happen? We would, after you finished the writing, you'd go down to the production where there's just copy machines churning these things out, and we would then, you'd be on collation duty, and, eventually we got one of those cool collating copiers that would just spit out complete packages in the racks, and we were stapling them and piling them in boxes and then handing them off to the drivers, and the drivers would drive around Washington, D.C. They had their regular route, like a paper route, and you'd, jump out, double park somewhere, jump out, run into the office buildings and hand out the copies of the hotline that people had subscribed to. So, that was the end of the process. The beginning of the process was once every 2 weeks or so, or for shifts of 2 weeks, every, month or two that would come to you. You were responsible for picking up the newspapers. We had to go to a place called Southwest Distributors or Southwest Distribution or whatever. It was a warehouse in the southwest waterfront area, I think, of Washington, D.C., which at the time was not a fantastic place to be at any time, really, especially not in the dead of night. But the job was you had to pick up the newspapers. This warehouse, I don't know what they did, but they were responsible for supplying all the newsstands and whatever the hell else you would supply. This was sort of the end of the era, I think, of this sort of distribution. But if you Washington, D.C. had a weird market. You have congressmen and staffers from all over the place, and there's a demand. If you are representing Minnesota, you got to have the Minneapolis Star-Tribune on your desk in the morning. You got to have the LA Times. You got to have the Hartford Courant. The Hartford Courant, by the way, one of the first newspapers to make their content available to us over the internet. It was not quite internet, I guess, but online. But we would log into their servers and download the paper from them each day. So we didn't have to get them from Southwest Distributors. But every paper, and I don't even remember all the names, but, the Houston Chronicle, you name it. It was all in there. Some of the papers came in the day after. Anchorage papers didn't come in right away. Hawaii. But we did have the advertiser would show up occasionally. I learned a lot of newspaper names that way. And the terrible part of the job was, when it was your turn, you had to get to Southwest Distributors at 4:30 in the morning every day during your shift, and you had to pick those things up and then drive them out to Falls Church. And it's not close. So, of course, if you're driving from anywhere far away, you really have to start early. So those days, I recall I would have my alarm, I would really cut it close. I'd set my alarm for 3:30 in the morning, roll out of bed, and, just dash out the door with a small breakfast. You wash up the best you can and just run out the door, shower the night before, and drive in the dead of night into Southwest. And the roads to get there are kind of a nightmare as well. And you pull up, and it's this chaotic scene, but the packages are ready for you. Pick them up, drive them to Falls Church, up the stairs, into the attic there. And the rest of the crew on clipping duty, and this too was a rotating basis, was to be there by 6 in the morning and to start sorting. But in the meantime, you were then to undo the bundles, spread out the papers, get the relevant sections going, and you could start clipping early if nobody else was there yet. Then by 6, everyone was there. By 8, we had our meeting, sorted out the articles, and everyone was hotlining. The job, of course, then being summarize the news, do as balanced a job as possible, and the premium was on the number of characters, numbers of lines, really, that you were writing. And there was a particular skill in hotlining, as they called it. And the idea was not to leave any orphan words or phrases, and try and end on a full line that had used up the entirety of the margins you were given in your word processor, because we were literally cutting and pasting the stuff together. I mean, we would print out our end product and then cut it out with scissors and literally paste a page together. And so stray orphan words or phrases would unnecessarily use up an additional line. So we learned all sorts of tips and tricks for abbreviating the things we were allowed to abbreviate, ways of saying things in fewer words so that you could bump things up. And the ultimate goal was to knock down the number of lines you were going to occupy. And we'd cut it up and tape it together on another piece of paper with the masthead up on top, and then use the Xerox machine to make these things, and double-sided copies. And I don't know, we were producing like somewhere between a dozen and 20 pages a day, and to get them out on your desk by noon was a real feat. So from like 8 to 10 we were writing, and then from, I don't know, maybe like 10 to 10:30 we were cutting and pasting the things. Along the way we were trying to lay it out too, and I guess that must have meant, this is a long time ago, but I guess that must have meant that by 10:30 we were at the Xerox machines, and then Xeroxing, stapling, and then out the door, I guess around 11:15, and then driving into D.C. to try to get these things. And I guess no one ever held us to it. It wasn't like it was free if you didn't get it by 12, but that was the goal. It was a hell of an operation, really. Made simpler eventually by the widespread use of the internet and the ability to just download the thing. We didn't have to deliver it anymore. Of course, I wondered whether the value of it diminished when people could just get the newspapers online themselves each day. But there's still value in getting a hard copy of the hometown papers into the congressional offices. Anyway, so Chuck Todd was there through all of that, and that's kind of where he came up from. And then when the National Journal bought up the Hotline and the rest of the publications, he stayed there, and then they branched out into video, and the rest, I guess, is history. And that brings us to the Rolling Stone piece, which we can start reading. Don't know that we'll finish it before the break, but I thought that was interesting background. He was a decent guy by all accounts, and he didn't have the goatee yet, but, we all liked him. He was fine. No problems with him. Thought he might be doing a good job at Meet the Press, but then I didn't watch, and most people who did told me, not so good. Let's see what Peter Wade has to say in the wake of all of this. Chuck Todd has had a front row seat for the spread of disinformation while hosting NBC's Meet the Press. Whether it was Kellyanne Conway using the phrase alternative facts to dispute media reports about the crowd size at Trump's inauguration, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana blatantly using Russian talking points to blame Ukraine for interfering in the 2016 election, or Ted Cruz spreading Russian conspiracy theories, Todd has seen it all. Yes, for a long time, too. I spoke with Todd about this erosion of truth ahead of an upcoming December 29th special edition of Meet the Press that will focus on journalism and the weaponization of disinformation, and feature guests such as Marty Baron, executive editor of the Washington Post, Dean Baquet, oh boy, executive editor of the New York Times, what's he going to do? The New Yorker's Masha Gessen and former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Sounds interesting, minus Baquet. Anyway, let's take a quick look at this thing before we take our break. Rolling Stone asking the question, what made you decide to devote an entire show to the topic of disinformation and fake news? Okay. Well, he says, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been pondering a social media special like this. Yeah. Last year, we focused on climate change, but we had not done climate change, or had we not done climate change? We were in the social media world thinking about what it was doing to our politics, and then you realize it's the misinformation. Yes. This is bigger than social media. The Ukraine story for me really crystallized it. Well, you know, I was going to say better late than never, but I'm not sure that's true. And for good or for bad, our show has been at the forefront of this. The first Sunday of the Trump administration is when the phrase alternative facts was debuted. It was on Meet the Press. Rudy Giuliani used the phrase, truth isn't truth. So look, whether we liked it or not, our platform has been used, yes, or they've attempted to use our platform to essentially disseminate, or sort of what I would say is lay the groundwork for this. And it's clearly an epidemic. And I think that even if a special like this is only seen by people who already believe we have a problem, it's a reminder. I'm a big supporter of something called the News Literacy Project. Well, my fear is that the next news consumers, how will they know truth from fiction? How will they have the tools to discern from this? This is not edited, I guess, or not that well anyway. I think our biggest problem is going into 2020. Our biggest problem going into 2020 is that we have two sets of standards simply on political advertising. If you choose to advertise on cable or television, on linear television, interesting, there's a certain set of standards on fact that you have, certain set of standards, I got you. Certain set of standards on fact that you have to surpass in order to get your ad on television. Not the case in social media. And we have seen the Trump campaign literally use two different ads. One that allows them to say their misinformation about Biden in the areas that they can. So part of this is putting it all in one place as almost an educational exercise, if you will, to show we have a systemic issue here. All right, a little bit scattered there, and maybe my reading of it didn't help very much. By the way, I'm not so convinced that linear television, I like the term, is that much better at holding people to standards. A little bit, but they also allow blatant lies. Okay, let me bring you back a little bit, our interviewer says. Were you surprised by the consistency that the Trump administration was willing to spread disinformation with Sean Spicer's initial press briefing when he lied about the crowd size at the inauguration? Were you surprised that the president and other administration officials and their allies just keep it going? And his answer here, I fully admit, listening to you ask that question now, and me giving you the honest answer of, yeah, I guess I really believed they wouldn't do this. And that's not really that egregious, if you ask me. I mean, you want to start that way. But anyway, he continues, just so absurdly naive in hindsight, Donald Trump's entire life has been spent using misinformation. His entire life. I've spent years studying him now on trying to figure out, how did this guy even learn politics? Where did he learn? I told you where Chuck learned anyway. So, he's going to be upset about that. There was a high value on honest journalism in his first job, right? He really was brought up in an atmosphere where political journalism was a trusted source. It had to be, or everything we were doing was worthless. Although we could summarize bad coverage, too. That's true. But, I mean, you had to really believe in what you were doing to get up that early. Anyway, he continues without embellishing. And the more you learn, you realize he learned at the feet of a master of deception in Roy Cohn, who learned at the feet of the original master of deception of sort of the modern political era in Joe McCarthy. So, I mean, look, if people want to read my answer to your question, boy, that Chuck Todd was hopelessly naive. Yeah, it looks pretty naive. I think we all made the mistake, not really, of not following Toni Morrison's advice, which is when people tell you who they are, believe them. Editor's note, Maya Angelou is the author of this quote. Okay, so fine. I don't think I would have known that myself, but that's, not helpful in making the case that you should get out of the way and give Chuck Todd more leeway, I guess. By the way, some commentary that Greg was passing along here. Oh, I may have to take a look at this during the break and add this into the mix. But okay, so Greg, good job dominating the show even when you're not here. It's fantastic. Good news picks here. Always appreciate your eye on these things. Let's see. We'll before we exit out for the break, we might be able to get in one more exchange here. In your recent interview, he is asked with Senator John Kennedy. He used Russian talking points to defend Trump. Somehow he gets that disinformation from Russia. Why do you think Republicans are willing to come on your show and run that exact line? Okay, interesting question. Let's see how much of the answer we can get here. The fact is, and by the way, this isn't going to be easy to show, but I actually think when we outline this, when we outline this, it will be easy to say. The right has an incentive structure to utter the misinformation. Look, I'll just be honest. Thank you. When I had the third senator to spread Russian disinformation, Senator Ted Cruz, come on my show and do this, who I did not expect to do this, I started to think he wants the confrontation. He wants to use this for some sort of appeasement of the right. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll continue after having the second question here put to Chuck Todd. We're reading the Rolling Stone piece, just by way of reminder, How Disinformation Spreads, according to Chuck Todd. And we are reading it for its kitsch value, largely. Though, again, I do have... I try to make room for Chuck Todd to make these mistakes, but it comes at a cost. And, well, if the cost is the entire country, then I guess you got to call it out from time to time. And so we gently do so. In some cases, I borrow quotes from others doing so more harshly. And I've had less patience for it over the years. I don't feel like I need to protect him, and he's not watching me criticize him anyway, so it's okay. And even if he was, he very likely wouldn't remember exactly who I was anyhow. So I'm not too worried about how this comes across. So let's see. Where were we? We were just reading. The second question was about, hey, were you really expecting, did you really think that Republicans were going to do this? And if so, why did you think Republicans were willing to come on your show and run with Russian propaganda? And apparently he thought Ted Cruz was somehow above doing this. And, Cruz, of course, billed himself forever as, one of the party's intellectuals and one of their top debaters. He was very into his college debating team record, etc. So surely he wouldn't carry this water. But then he did. And I guess this woke Chuck Todd up to some extent. He says, so I'll be honest, when I had my third senator on to spread Russian disinformation, Ted Cruz, I did not expect him to do this. I started to think Cruz wants confrontation. He wants to use this for some sort of appeasement of the right. Now, he still wouldn't think, he believes this. He believes instead that he's trying to provoke some sort of strategically valuable fight. I didn't know what else to think, he continues. I was stunned because he's a Russia hawk. He spent the entire week showcasing his hawkishness on Russia. threatening the administration on the pipeline in Germany, and really be there? I don't know what that's supposed to mean. So the reason and I'm sorry I ever showed an expression, the reason that expression on my face went viral, I think, was I was genuinely shocked. Why be afraid of showing that, though? It doesn't seem... All right, well, whatever. And by the way, they came to us. They came to us saying they wanted to come on this week. And I really naively thought maybe he wants to remind people that with Russia and blaming Ukraine, this is getting ridiculous. And it turned out not to be the case. So I do think one of the things that I want to explore on this is, I guess in his special, is the incentive structure. One of the things we don't fully appreciate in mainstream media on these attacks is that it's become fun to attack the press, if that makes sense, on the right. It doesn't matter if we're right or wrong, attack them anyway. And I mean, he's right. He's late to it. Many people who he probably regards as Cheeto munchers and idiots have said so, but they're saying so from the peanut gallery, and they can be safely ignored. And now that he's realized it, well, that's human nature too, right? By the time you get around to realizing it, well, you're probably pretty upset with yourself for not realizing it earlier, and you tend to want to make excuses for yourself. Let's see. Forwarded to us for our consideration here is the comment of Oliver Willis, who says, Chuck Todd isn't that naive, he just doesn't care. Our whole world is oriented around thinking someone in such an influential position actually cares about the world he helps to shape. He does not. And, I mean, while it may be the case that is currently true, it was never my impression of him. He did care deeply about politics, although, as others comment, he did tend to see it as a game, and he was a big fan of that game, and viewing things that way is problematic. But I don't think that he didn't care, and I don't think that he wanted to be, well, he certainly didn't want to be seen as having an agenda, because he thought, I thought, my impression of him was he learned whatever the craft is, whatever the trade is that he actually learned, he learned it in an atmosphere where, it was generally understood and revered as a concept that when you spoke to the press, you'd at least do your best to tell them the truth. And that the reason that people got tripped up in talking to the press when they were trying to spin things and or lie about them, it wasn't that he ever believed that politicians wouldn't lie or dissemble with the press. It was that he believed that people who did that were troubled by what they were doing. They were looking to avoid being caught and called out as liars, and that it was a huge prize among the members of the press to be the one to catch them in something like this, and that if they did catch them in something like this, people would say so, and then they would be appreciative of the journalist's work in making it obvious, and everybody would heap opprobrium on the lying politician, and they would be upset with themselves and either apologize, or their career would be ended, or they would resign, or they would quit or stop running for office or whatever. But I mean, he must have noticed much earlier than his work at NBC, before he ever moved to NBC. I'm sure he must have noticed this is not working very well. People who lie just continue to lie, and they move up rather than out. So I don't know exactly why that never occurred to him, but I think it's hard to call it, how would you pronounce the word, naivete, that is at work here. He's aware, and it isn't that he doesn't care, but I guess, I don't know, I'm not exactly certain how I would describe it, but he thought that it was a job, sorting it out was a job for voters and not the journalists, because the politicians would be careful never to just blatantly lie, then be caught and called out in it and then lie that they had been caught. That just wasn't a possibility in his mind. Getting called out on, even then, before he was at NBC, I guess I should also explain the importance of television news, even at the hotline. The hotline did cover, we were chiefly about covering print, but we did cover the television stuff, and there was a separate process for that and separate TV editors for it. And they, back in those days, we literally we'd have to have, 4 televisions running, because we had 4 whole networks that were doing news. I guess we had 5, including CNN then. So, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox was sort of there, but they weren't. I don't know if the Fox News channel was up and running yet. I don't think so. But there was a Fox News and there was a national Fox News. And its editorial message, though it wasn't quite as right-wing at the time, did filter down to the local affiliates, and they did have a local presence in D.C., and they did shows. But I don't know. I'm not certain that we covered Fox that much. Anyway, we had, the televisions running and VCRs set with timers that would tape all the shows, and then someone would come in the middle of the night and summarize the TV shows for us and leave them there, and we hardly ever saw them. And it was like Laszlo from Real Genius, if you remember that movie. The guy was really like that too. He's also a good parallel is from Silicon Valley, Guilfoyle. He just looks the same. It's got that weird look. Anyway, that's how I remember him. But we watched those things too and watched it closely, and that was sort of the pinnacle of political news coverage. The best of the best. The people who, were fantastic at the newspapers would be promoted to White House correspondent, and fantastic at their job as reporters on TV would be promoted to White House correspondent. And then maybe then from there you could scale the heights and be the host of Meet the Press. So being the host of Meet the Press was, I think, probably from early on his mind. But it's hard for me to think back on what he was like then and believe that he thought that it was even possible to go on Meet the Press and just lie your face off right in front of, and have the host know it and not have America go, what? We're finished with that guy. I don't know what he thought the formula was for relaying that you should be finished with this guy, but I don't know. It seems like not something he contemplated while he was there, because it wasn't done while he was coming up. It really wasn't. All right. I should continue on with this because it's not that much longer, and then we can move on to some other subjects and some other reactions to this that are also important parts of the story. So where were we? And then he gets upset with himself. I was shocked that he was shocked that he showed an expression. Right? I guess, neutrality was also, important to him. And he was, he really learned to live the hotline ethos, and that it wasn't so much that we were worried about balance. That wasn't the issue, but the issue was that we were, one, trying to minimize, the verbiage, but also trying to make sure that, okay, well, if there's a Republican versus Democrat contest going on, an election here, we would try and make sure that each side, we summarized what was said, and we were definitely not editorializing at the hotline, and that was a much clearer part of our mission even than it was at the papers, but mostly it was because we didn't have room to editorialize. We had to, simply say, here's what was covered, and there was no room for reporting either. We were simply passing on the information that we had picked up from the newspapers. Anyway, so it wasn't so much that we needed balance or both sides, but it was an issue. We had staffed the place with that in mind. The editor-in-chief was a very active Democrat. The publisher was a very active Republican political consultant. So that was the atmosphere. So where were we here? we left off with his answer continues on after he was surprised that it turned out not to be the case that Ted Cruz was going to be better than the other guys. So I do think one of the things I want to explore on this is the incentive structure. One of the things we don't fully appreciate is the mainstream media on these attacks is it's become fun to attack the press. And, oh, yes, we did read this part, but I was reminded, and I can't recall offhand whose tweet it was or even when it happened, but somebody, maybe we even read it out loud in the air. Maybe it was Dave Johnson, or maybe I'm misremembering where it came from. But basically summarizing, yeah, that same point, the thing you really have to keep in mind at this point is that it is a huge, huge plus in the minds of Republicans these days to come on the air or talk to reporters and lie to them intentionally. Not so much dissemble, not duck their questions, but to proactively put out BS and lies and have fun doing it. Reminds me a little bit of personal stories I heard a long time ago about people who were doing very grating, dispiriting work as salespeople, but like door-to-door sales or appointment sales. Like I know a guy who was in window replacement, and there's this very Glenn Ross that in the living room this is how you got to close, and it was a very adversarial way of looking at things. And don't let yourself become. Not only don't let yourself become emotionally involved with the people you're selling to, but don't believe any of their BS excuses for why they can't pay what you're saying they should pay for their windows. And if you really find yourself losing control, you do stuff like, whatever, you make a break and ask to use the bathroom. And there was various stories about the ways you would take out your anger, some of which I am not certain are really true, and I don't even bother passing them on here. But the point was that you gave yourself a sort of pep talk in the mirror about how this was the enemy out there, and whatever it took to go out there and get that goddamn paper signed on the dotted line so you could get the money and feed your family with it. That was the high-minded idea. I was not this salesperson. I was listening to somebody else. But it reminds me a lot of that. I think that Republicans do now, perhaps at least the well-trained ones, enter into media interaction with this in mind. I want to deliver this lie. I know it's a lie. It's not I'm trying to, weasel my way out of something. I'm proactively delivering misinformation. And I do think that caught Chuck Todd by surprise. It probably caught all of us by surprise, except we figured it out, I think, a lot earlier, and he had various reasons not to. All right, moving on. What surprises me most, this is our interviewer now saying this, what surprises me most is the lack of fear of being called out as unpatriotic. Interesting. And Todd answers here, yeah, I know, you would think it would. That's why I was like, I don't understand. You hit on something. Look, he loves to say look a lot. Look, I'm checking ourselves all the time. I'm like, all right, I don't assume I'm 100% right ever. I don't get why so many people are comfortable uttering stuff that they may know will look ridiculous in 3 or 4 years. Well, we've seen it. We've seen him do it. It might get them through 3 or 4 months, and maybe this is just about getting through a primary or whatever it is. Look, here's look again. Look, the Iraq War. In the aftermath, discredited enough politicians and enough media. I assume that when all this, in the Trump era, and this is, to me, how I think we in the press will get judged, it'll be in about 5 or 6 years in the rearview mirror. How did we cover it in the moment? Were we honest in the moment? It turned out that the previous generation of national reporters missed the story in the moment. I'm not saying they were dishonest in the moment. They were too trusting of their sources. They were too naive. I don't think it was active disinformation, if you will. It was probably more feeling patriotic pressure that was coming down on them. Whatever motive it was, it just turned out they let it influence how they reported. Maybe the tone of the reporting in particular. I think we're going to have another reckoning when this post-Trump era truly works itself out of our system. That's the end of the interview. And you can see that people were not particularly satisfied with how that went and what came next. So I'm going to take another cue from Greg here. The one I saw most widely discussed online was, in fact, this view of it, and I think I probably anticipated it coming almost as soon as I saw that Chuck Todd was the subject of an interview like this. And let's see. Jay Rosen at Press Think, a constant critic of Chuck Todd's and others, of course, but always, with an eye on the entirety of the media, of course. But right up here, I guess, Jay, too, comes up from a time when this was considered the pinnacle of American journalism, so it deserves a lot of attention. And it does still influence things. I guess the rest of the political community, even though I wonder whether things have changed in where the what was I going to say? Where the place in the in the political journalism world that the hotline occupied. I don't know if it still does occupy it, but the entire Washington political establishment looked to not only the Sunday shows as the pinnacle, but they also felt like they had an insider view of things. They all knew that if you didn't read the hotline and didn't get the hotline, you didn't know what you were talking about. But they also must have noticed at some point that basically anything that was put together in the hotline would be reflected at the end of the week in the Sunday shows. So they did go hand in hand, but really they were very interested also in the part of the illusion. Remember, I guess if you're a political consultant, part of the illusion there is you need to sell your political expertise, whether as a pundit or a political consultant or even a prominent politician. Everybody looks to you to know what's going on and to have some coherent sounding opinion about what's in the news. And the hotline enabled you to have a finger on the pulse of what was being covered. But most people weren't reading every newspaper in America, but you could summarize it for them. And if you did so on the air on the Sunday shows, you were authoritative. But either being a guest on the shows or even being the host of the show, that was the way the country got signaled what was really going on, what was really up in the minds of the political world and how things were really going. So it's tremendously influential, which is, I guess, part of the reason that Republicans decided to start lying on them. But they were lying everywhere. But it was be a goal to lie on Meet the Press. And I guess to the extent that they could contribute to everyone's annoyance with the hosts, so much the better. If liberals as well were angry with the hosts of the Sunday shows and annoyed with them and down on them and critical of their ability to report, that just made their job easier. We agree. Both of us think Chuck Todd is terrible or George Stephanopoulos is an idiot or what have you. That's why I lie to them. They're not worth telling the truth to. I think there's something to this. But I guess just generally, I find it interesting that, the position that the Sunday shows occupied, and it's always been interesting to me, and maybe this is why I never watched them, because of my experience at the hotline. That I knew that watching the Sunday shows was a waste of time. It was repetitive for me. I had already seen the material. I had written the material, or I had rewritten, summarized the material that others had written, and I knew what the take was going to be on everything because we wrote it. And the people who showed up on those Sunday shows, and even on the old, remember the old McLaughlin show, the McLaughlin group, and they had the same pundits on almost all the time. But that was just regurgitating the hotline. We would watch. That was a subject of a lot of laughter. All the shows really in the hotline office, just laughing and watching all your stuff come back to you as authoritative when you knew the origin of it. So I don't know. I still think that's important background in all of this. But let me get over to Jay Rosen, who has actual coherent thoughts about this thing. The Christmas Eve Confessions of Chuck Todd, he writes at Press Think. That disinformation was going to overtake Republican politics was discoverable years before, he says, he discovered it. And I think that's true, and you all feel that innately. Around midnight on Christmas Eve, Rolling Stone posted a short interview with Chuck Todd, host of, quote, the longest-running show on television, unquote, NBC's Meet the Press. Its contents were explosive, embarrassing, enraging, and just plain weird. 3 years after Kellyanne Conway introduced the doctrine of alternative facts on his own program, a light went on for Chuck Todd. Can I say that again? 3 years after the light goes on. Republican strategy, he now realized, was to make stuff up, spread it on social media, repeat it in your answers to journalists, even when you know it's a lie with crumbs of truth mixed in, and then convert whatever controversy arises into go-get-'em points with the base, while pocketing for the party a juicy dividend, additional mistrust of the news media to help insulate President Trump among loyalists when his increasingly brazen actions are reported as news. Okay. Yes, and I guess this paragraph gave me the thought of it's similar, really, the role of social media to what we were doing in the hotline, except we were doing it honestly at the hotline. Here's what's circulating. We summarize it. It then moves to the punditry, and then from the punditry into the Sunday shows, and from the Sunday shows into the national consciousness. But it should already have been in the national consciousness, because all of what we did at the hotline was summarizing what was already out there in the newspapers. But I thought what was similar here is the cycle, really. And here they had to invent their own cycle for lies, because, our cycle wasn't built for lies. I suppose if we had been fed nothing but literal outright lies in the local press, then we would have passed that on. But, we would all have been brainwashed at that point. And maybe we were, right? Maybe we'll learn from one day, or all come to realize from reading Zinn that, they've been lying to us the whole time. But the mainstream view of things is that was not always the case. But anyway, it was more, I just paused more to note the use of a cycle that feeds on itself being used both, effectively both for truth or maybe truth or something closer to truth, and outright lies, things that you begin with as lies and are lies and you're doing them because they're lies. Same cycle, different media. So anyway, let's continue on here with Jay's thoughts. Todd repeatedly called himself naive for not recognizing the pattern, itself an astounding statement that cast doubt on his fitness for office, it's not an office really, as host of Meet the Press, but it's important, so maybe it feels like office. While the theme of the interview was waking up to the truth of Republican actions in the information warfare space, Todd went to sleep on the implications of what he revealed. It took him 3 years to understand a fact about American politics that was there on the surface, unconcealed since the day after inauguration. And earlier, of course. Many, many interpreters had described it for him during those lost years when he could not bring himself to believe it. I am one, he adds parenthetically, and we all are. So, you cannot call that an oversight. It's a strategic blindness that he superintended. By strategic blindness, I mean what people mean when they quote Upton Sinclair, as Greg always does, right? It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. And yeah, easy to believe that that's the case. All right, let's see. Let me take some other notes as we go along here. The ostensible purpose, Jay continues, of the Rolling Stone interview was to promote a special edition of Meet the Press. That's why he would do it. On December 29th, coming up, that will focus on the weaponization of disinformation. And again, another special, much needed, but will I watch it? No. It's like watching more of my own day on Twitter. I know that this is the case. I don't really need to hear it from them. All right. Anyway, the effect of the interview is to bring Meet the Press, and by extension, similar shows, into epistemological, there we go, got to get my pronunciation, epistemological crisis. $10 word there to screw me up as I'm heading into break. With Todd's confessions, the mask, has come off. It could have come off a long time ago, but the anchors, producers, guests, advertisers, and to an unknown degree, the remaining viewers colluded in an act of make-believe that lurched along until now. One way to say it, they agreed to pretend that Conway's threatening phrase, alternative facts, was just hyperbole. The kind of inflammatory moment that makes for viral clips and partisan bickering. More silly than it was ominous. I think that's likely true. Good observation. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Into our last segment here, let's continue on with Jay Rosen's observations on the Chuck Todd interview. Just see what else he wants to add to this. The ostensible purpose, as we said, was to promote the new special edition of Meet the Press. And, of course, its effect, as we struggled to say, was that it instead brought Meet the Press and, by extension, similar shows into epistemological crisis. I've done this wrong again. With Todd's confessions, the mask has come off. This is the part I wanted to remind you of here. It could have come off a long time ago, but the anchors, producers, guests, advertisers, and, to an unknown degree, the remaining viewers colluded, that's a key word, in an act of make-believe that lurched along until now, right? Then, of course, basically the idea that, well, when Kellyanne Conway came on and said alternative facts, this was just hyperbole, more silly than it was ominous. In reality, she had made a grave announcement. The nature of the Trump government would be propagandistic. And as Gary Kasparov observes for us, and it's linked here, the point of modern propaganda isn't only to misinform or push an agenda, it is to exhaust your critical thinking, to annihilate truth. This exhaustion, this annihilation, were on their way to the Sunday shows and to all interactions with journalists. That is what Kellyanne Conway was saying that day on Meet the Press. But the people who run the show chose not to believe it. So, I need to make a note to myself to see if I can't, I might not be able to dig up this tweet on Republicans lying to the press for fun and sport, and that's really what they view their job as being. As I recall, again, the part of the quote was, well, they just don't view, they view the press as the enemy, and they view the people as the enemy, and that's what helps them get over what would ordinarily be the psychic trauma of knowing that you are a liar. It was that these people don't deserve the truth. I know what the truth is. I'll tell them what I need to tell them, but they don't need to know the truth because they're bad people. I don't have to tell them. I have no obligation to tell them the truth. And that was something that Corey Lewandowski ended up spilling overtly at some point, that he was under no obligation to tell the media the truth about things. Remember that? That came up too. All right. Anyway, let's head back to this. So this exhaustion, this annihilation, was on its way to the Sunday shows and to all interactions with journalists. That is what Kellyanne Conway was saying that day on Meet the Press, but the people who run the show chose not to believe it, because why would you go forward with your life at that point? You know, if your life is the show, Meet the Press, what's the point of meeting the press if, you know, the reason and why do they call the shows what they call them? I mean, I guess with the exception of This Week, which is, what the hell does that mean? Nothing. It's the most non-descriptive title you could buy. I don't know, we're summarizing the news of the week. Okay, fine. But Face the Nation, Meet the Press. Those are supposed to be, I guess back in the day when they came up with the titles, those are supposed to be intimidating titles. You're going to have to face the nation. You're going to have to meet the press. Both the nation and the press can hold you accountable. You lie to our faces, you're finished. And that was the original premise of the show. Now, of course, it's ridiculous. The whole goal of the show is to go on and lie, for Republicans anyway. Democrats still sort of kind of playing the 1950s game, but they did learn a new update in the 1980s, which was just say, what you want to say, regardless of the questions. Whatever they ask you, bring it around to what you want to say, and then say it. Everybody sort of did that eventually by the 1980s, but Republicans moved on from that. And not only say what you want to say, but say what you want to be true. And just go do that instead. Anyway, as they point out here, the people who run the show chose not to believe it. They were no longer the most important people in journalism and therefore the most important people in the country. And because their country was the leadership of the free world, they were therefore the most important people in the world. They weren't people who, no one would dare lie to anymore if they believed what they were hearing. Right? Their salaries depended on not believing it or not understanding it. All right. Well, Jay continues, obviously. That's malpractice. Chuck Todd called it naivete, but he did so in order to minimize the error. This we cannot allow. Now, let's look more closely at his Christmas Eve confessions. We heard some of these, of course. The Ukraine story for me really crystallized it. Remember that one? By it, he means the damage that disinformation was doing to our politics. His show has been at the forefront of the problem. Whether we'd liked it or not, our platform had been used, or they've attempted to use our platform to disseminate fabrications. And Jay includes parenthetically here, what has to change to prevent this went unremarked upon. There was also, we have a systemic issue here, which is that it's easy to spread lies through social media, parenthetically, and on Meet the Press. Yes. Peter Wade, the Rolling Stone interviewer, asked about Sean Spicer's inauguration crowd size rant. Were you surprised that the president and the other administration officials and their allies just kept it going? Todd's answer was, I guess I really believed they wouldn't do this. Just so absurdly naive in hindsight. If people want to read my answer to your question, boy, that Chuck Todd was hopelessly naive. Yeah, it looks pretty naive. I guess it does. Todd said he had been studying up on Trump's methods. He learned at the feet of the master of deception, Roy Cohn, you remember all of that, and that he learned in turn from Joe McCarthy. Jay adds this, McCarthy not only deceived the country, he exploited existing routines in journalism to do it, which is the theme of this book, and it's linking to, what? Was it one of his own books? I'm not sure. No, the Edwin R. Bailey book, Joe McCarthy and the Press is what he's talking about, from University of Wisconsin Press, as a matter of fact. Okay. Anyway, he was able to generate, maybe this is a comment from the book, he was able to generate massive publicity that made him the center of anti-communism because he understood the press, its practices, and its values. He knew what made news. The press was implicated in McCarthy's rise because he had gamed it by, for example, announcing wild new charges just before the wire service's deadline. The accusations would be out there, the investigation of them took more time and made less news. Yes, okay, now a familiar tactic. We've certainly seen it in the days since. Newt Gingrich himself, a master of that. I always thought, though, that, and it's largely true, I mean, Gingrich is pretty much an irrelevancy now, but I always thought that the worst thing that could happen to Newt Gingrich was for reporters to have the ability to Google his comments in real time in a palm top computer, what we used to call the palm top computer back in those, what were they called those things? The Apple product that the Newton, was that it? That thing was kind of a flop. But now, of course, we all have the smartphones. and we all forget about the flops along the way. But that hasn't rendered him a total irrelevancy. He's picked up on the new tactic of who cares if they know you're lying. And I think he probably had that in mind. He must have had that in his back pocket at the time, given what a big liar he was. So, anyway, let's see. Todd said he recognized that the right has an incentive structure to utter the misinformation when they come on his show. And they welcome a confrontation with journalists over it because fighting with the press helps them with core supporters. Again, this seemed to be new information to him. He said he was stunned that Ted Cruz came on Meet the Press and as did Senator John Kennedy before him, and repeated the debunked claim that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election in a material way. I was stunned because he's a Russia hawk. I was genuinely shocked, right? He revealed that the Cruz camp had asked to come on Meet the Press in order to spread a false story. Another shock. And I really naively thought maybe he wants to remind people, meaning remind them that the Ukraine plot is Russian disinformation, and it turned out not to be the case. That is an upside-down understanding of Ted Cruz as well. One of the things we don't fully appreciate in mainstream media, he said, is that it's become fun to attack the press, and it doesn't matter if we're right or wrong. The attacks keep coming. Trump has turned this into sport. Yes. As if discovering this for the first time, he marveled at pervasive bad faith on the right. He said that prominent people he knows in the Republican coalition who would normally trust skeptical accounts in the establishment press over Sean Hannity's latest conspiracy theory will now parrot the conspiracy theory. Wow, have we gone off the rails on the right side of the silo of the conversation that's taking place? He confessed to not understanding the motivations of Republican office holders who spread lies that are easily disproved. I don't get why so many people are comfortable uttering stuff that they may know will look ridiculous in 3 or 4 years. He said that when the Trump era is concluded, we're going to have another reckoning over how the press performed during it, about journalists in the run-up to the Iraq War. He said, it's not that they didn't believe what they were reporting, but reported it anyway. They didn't believe what they were reporting, but reported it anyway. Rather, they were too trusting of their sources. Maybe they were too naive, that word again. Throughout the interview, Todd repeatedly changed the term disinformation in Rolling Stone's questions, that's interesting, into misinformation in his answers, as if United States senators were just poorly informed and not actively and deliberately misleading the public. Thus, he continued to perform his naivete while simultaneously calling himself out for it, a weird combo. In a crucial error of omission, he said nothing about what he or his show would do to change course, other than broadcast his December 29th special on the problem of misinformation. And to cap it off, he said of Republican operatives and office holders, I think we all made the mistake of not following Toni Morrison's advice, right? And when people tell you who they are, believe them. Fact check, it was Maya Angelou who said this, not Toni Morrison. That eventually makes it into the piece. What to make of this performance? Jay sums it up. It's not naive of him, it's malpractice. I mean, that would be a bad admission, right? Like if it really was malpractice and everybody agreed, you'd be fired, and that would be the end of your cool gig. Chuck Todd's entire brand is based on the claim that he understands politics. Since 2007, he has been NBC's political director, which means he has influence over all coverage. He is literally the in-house expert on the subject. You don't get to claim you are naive about politics when you have these kinds of positions. That's a good point. It would be like a chief risk officer saying, I didn't understand the gamble we were taking. Well, that's your job. It's not that he was naive. He did not care to listen. I am going to use my own writing to show what I mean, but there are many others who could be quoted in similar fashion. On January 22nd, 2017, 2 days after Trump was inaugurated, I wrote about Sean Spicer's crowd-sized spectacular. There are several audiences for it, I said. One, of course, was the press. For them, the message was, and again, this is Jay Rosen's message, we are not bound by what you call facts. We have our own, and we will proceed to put them out, regardless of what the evidence says. Think about that as we think about moving into the impeachment trial. And we're not going to have evidence, or we're not going to have witnesses. We'll put out our own. And they're doing it now on Chuck Todd's show. We are not bound by what you call facts. We have our own, and we will proceed to put them out regardless of what the evidence says. It's not a problem for us if you stagger from the room in disbelief. We're not trying to win the news cycle or win you over. We're trying to demonstrate independence from and power over you people. This room is not just for briefings, announcements, and Q&A. It's also a theater of resentment in which you play a crucial part. Our constituency hates your guts. This, I guess the press briefing room at the White House, is the place where we commune with them around that fact. See you tomorrow, guys. And they always came back, by the way. Another message went to core supporters, to the core Trump constituency, and an audience primed for this over years of acrid liberal media critique. Two things were said. We're going to rough these people up because we know how long you've waited for that. But also, and in return, you have to accept our alternative facts, even if your own eyes tell you otherwise. This, too, is a stark message. The epistemological price for being a soldier in Trump's army is high. You have to swallow, repeat, and defend things that simply don't check out. One of the better examples of that that I've seen lately, the Daily Show clip. I wish I knew who it was. I don't follow the show close enough anymore. Interviewing people about the impeachment stuff, and they all parrot, of course, all the lines. It's, they say the same things. It's BS. It's total BS. And then they give you the read the transcript line, and the interviewer would say, "So have you read the transcript?" "No, I haven't, but just to be clear, you think it's important that everybody read the transcript?" Yes, everyone should read the transcript, right? In order to know what's going on, in order to know the truth, right? Right. But you have not read it. No, I haven't. But people said, I trust the word of our president. Other people have read it for me, but it was the most hilarious thing, except, it's ruining the world. That's bad. Anyway, back to Jay here. That disinformation was going to overtake Republican politics, or rather, that disinformation was going to overtake Republican politics was discoverable years before Chuck Todd discovered it. That attacks on the press were baked into Trump's political style was knowable from 2015 on. Or quite honestly, if you were from the New York area, much earlier. But not everybody had that advantage. It's a lot of weird nuance to the wording of these stories, I guess, because it's so meta that keeps tripping me up. Anyway, there's still more here. Let's continue on. It's not naivete. It's willful blindness to what the Republican Party had become. 4 years before Trump was elected, Tom Mann and Norm Ornstein wrote, remember this? We talked about it on the show. The GOP has become an insurgent outlier in American politics. It is ideologically extreme, scornful of compromise, unmoved by conventional understanding of facts, evidence, and science, and dismissive of the legitimacy of its political opposition. Remember, it was let's just admit it, right? Republicans are the problem. Or I forget what the title of their work was. But Chuck Todd, as NBC's political director, and Meet the Press as its premier politics show, could have taken seriously what these exemplary members of the Washington establishment were saying back in 2012. By all rights, they should have, right? They had all the credentials. They chose not to. But not because of their naivete. They thought they knew better than Mann and Ornstein. And they were probably afraid of sounding too extreme themselves. He's not naive. He's an insider who thought his read was better. Well, this much I can tell you. He did always think that he was getting an insider's read before the insiders got it, because that was the culture of the hotline. There's maybe, finally, some value to my providing that color from earlier. You can smell on his Christmas Eve confessions the regrets of the insider who thought he knew these people well because he broke bread with them. Again, I don't know, maybe putting too much emphasis on that part. Rang them up for off-the-record conversations. Rang them up, like, Americans say, called them up. He's American. He just loves that. Anyway, and enjoyed the kind of green room bonhomie that, do I pronounce that right? That says, sure, we have different roles, but we're all part of the same industry called Washington. That might be leftover hotline culture, too. He thought he could predict what a Ted Cruz would do because he has behind-the-scenes knowledge. Naivete is not a good word for that. He thought himself savvier than the rest of us. We're going to bring it around to his savvy thesis. It's holding up, right? He thought himself savvier than the rest of us. I was not at all shocked that Senator Cruz took the party line on Ukraine interfering in 2016. Were you? Todd was, because he had miseducated himself. It's not naive. It's a lack of imagination, a failure of insight. The practices common to political journalism have premises to them. When the premises shatter, the practices make less sense. This has been the central problem of covering the Trump movement since 2015. A simple example is fact-checking. One of its premises is that candidates and office holders can be shamed into staying roughly within factual bounds. Used to be the case, right? A president who has no sense of shame breaks the practice by busting the premise. Doesn't mean you stop fact-checking, but you do have to alter your expectations and start thinking about alternatives. A key premise for Meet the Press is symmetry between the two major political parties. The whole show is built on that, even though they don't actually have symmetry between the parties and who comes on the show. But okay. But in the information sphere, the subject of Chuck Todd's confessions, asymmetry has taken command. The right-wing ecosystem for news does not operate like the rest of the country's news system. And increasingly, conservative politics is getting sucked into conservative media. It makes more sense to see Fox News and the Trump White House as two parts of the same organism. As these trends grind on, they put stress on Meet the Press practices. But it takes, it says if takes, but it takes imagination to see how the show might be affected or changed. In place of that, we have Chuck Todd pleading naivete. So what will they do now? My answer? They have no earthly idea. This is what I mean by an epistemological crisis. Chuck Todd has essentially said that on the right, there is an incentive structure that compels Republican office holders to use their time on Meet the Press for the spread of disinformation. So, do you keep inviting them on the air to do just that? If so, then you're breaking faith with the audience and creating a massive problem in real-time fact-checking. If not, then you just broke the show in half. There is simply nothing in the playbook at Meet the Press that tells the producers what to do in this situation. Well, it's not in the playbook, of course, but what you do is you end the show. Which, actually, maybe I better finish the damn story because we're about 2 seconds from finishing, and I should just give Jay the courtesy of finishing up. There's simply nothing in the playbook at Meet the Press that tells the producers what to do in this situation. As I have tried to show, they didn't arrive here through acts of naivete, but willful blindness, malpractice among the experts in charge, an insider's mentality, a listening breakdown, a failure of imagination, and sheer disbelief that the world could have changed so much upon people paid so well to understand it. And, well, that's another annoying point altogether. But this ends the Jay Rosen portion of the show, like 8 minutes before we're gone. But okay, this is an important point here, and I guess I would say, obviously it's not in the Meet the Press playbook, but maybe it should have been like the last page. Is that when you get to this point where none of the premises of the show are functional anymore, you end the show, you pull the plug, and that, just by itself, could be the sort of thing that breaks the dam. I mean, it's maybe naive to think that anything will break the dam at this point, but I don't know. I think about it just because it occurred to me that underlying everything, and I've said this, my own theory, a number of times on the show. That's what the show's about, is airing my own theories. But this theory goes way beyond, or goes back before the show, and something before I was even doing the radio show, the podcast, that I had thought about, that there's something about the consistent routine of American life that's comforting enough just by itself, that as long as there's, food on the shelves and the stores are open and the things you come to depend on in your daily life, however routine they may be, are still there, then it just doesn't feel like stuff is broken. It doesn't feel like the end of the world. If, as I summarized, if there's still 31 flavors at Baskin-Robbins, except that doesn't make any sense to kids anymore. And everybody's got 31 flavors. And I don't even know whether Baskin-Robbins ever really did either limit themselves to 31 or only have 31 on display at any given time. Whatever. The point is, these hackneyed ideas about what you can expect as an American consumer. You're an American consumer watching Meet the Press, too. And I guess what it might take to break the minds of the mass of people who, I guess, still watch the shows is to come on and say, this is the last edition of Meet the Press. This was the longest running show on television, but we're effed. We're done. This is the last one because we can't present you a balanced view of American politics anymore. It doesn't exist. We would be accused by the audience we trained to think this way, that we were being unfair or unbalanced if we stopped inviting Republicans on the program. But the problem is that Republicans, they don't care about meeting the press. The premise of the show was you were supposed to be scared to lie to the press. Over at Face the Nation, you were supposed to be scared to lie to the nation through the medium of the press. That doesn't work anymore. And not only does it not matter anymore, it doesn't frighten Republicans anymore, it's been stood on its head. They are coming on for the purpose of lying. It's not that we are calling them out on the carpet and they're concluding that the only alternative they have is to lie or dissemble or spin back in the old days when they weren't just maybe thought to be outright lying, even though they largely were. I mean, tax cuts will pay for themselves. Come on. They probably even thought they were telling the truth, but still, they weren't. And, with that gone, there's really no reason for us to have them on. In fact, it's a disservice to you, the viewer, who trusts us to be, the arbiter of what really is in politics. We're breaking faith with you by pretending that there's still two regular parties that we only need to find compromise between in order to get things done in Washington. And, this is also very painful, but I have to tell you that I guess I can't even bring some Democrats on the air either, the ones who are in the problem solvers caucus anyway, or third way or what have you, who still believe that there's some way to work together, to reach across the aisle with the other. The other party's not there. You can reach all you want. They're not there. They're not sitting there as a political party. They're not legislators per se. They've been, given those seats. That's the job we've assigned to them because that's the office we've elected them to. But they're not who we used to put there. They're not the same kind of people. There won't be anything worked out with them. And you should forget about that. And that means, unfortunately, that the premise of our show, for which I, Chuck Todd, have been paid, millions of dollars, which has been a fantasy of mine for my whole life. Not the millions of dollars, but that doesn't hurt. But being at the pinnacle of American political journalism has always been my thing. I'm here now, but I made enough money. Maybe I can retire safely and comfortably, so maybe that's not so bad. I can think about it that way. But I am announcing the end of the American political system, and that's kind of scary, not just because it's the end of my livelihood at the pinnacle, but because it might mean the end of Western civilization or life on Earth as we know it if things really fall apart and Kim Jong-un does something particularly crazy or whatever, or we eventually elect a president who does stand up to Putin, and Putin says, well, if I'm not going to get all the toys and get to go home with them and keep all my money, then I'm going to destroy the world, and everybody goes down with me. Right? If I burn, you burn with me, the reverse of the end of the Hunger Games movies, which are on constantly, apparently. Anyway, I mean, that's pretty troublesome stuff, and but it could be the sort of thing that finally, like I said, maybe nothing can break the dam. But imagine what the fallout from something like that would be if the Sunday shows guys announce to you, you know, I don't know what to tell you, but there's nobody left in this other party here. So that's it. That's the end of American politics. That's the end of the show. People are just going to lie. They're going to say what they want to say. They can do that on the internet. I don't have to get up early to do this. I don't have to have my hair cut just so every day anymore. I don't have to go through makeup. I don't have to prep for the show. Maybe this is great. This might be the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm sitting on a pile of money. Good luck to the rest of you who aren't. That might be the shocker that changes things. Could that be the shocker? It won't be the shocker that convicts Donald Trump in the Senate. Nothing apparently going to do that. But, you know, maybe I suppose the only thing that I can hold out as a possibility is shocking people to the state where, you know, they call up their senators and say, what the hell, my programs? Now I'm really pissed. You think that would move anybody? I doubt it. But it would change things.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, thanks to Greg Dworkin, who directed the entire show from behind the scenes today. I actually enjoyed going through all of this material. We have a lot to share with you. Now we still have our Friday show left to do that. And, well, that's always room for the weird and esoteric, so maybe that's exactly what we'll get. Unless, of course, it's a total Trump meltdown between then and now. Look out for that.